Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Regulatory Strategy for Registering Rare Disease Products in the EU. My name is Brendan Wrigley. I'm a manager within clinical development here at Alira Health. I can see we're still missing some participants, so we'll just wait a couple more moments to allow everyone to arrive. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to today's webinar, Regulatory Strategy for Registering Rare Disease Products in the EU. As I said before, my name is Brendan Wrigley, and I'm a manager in clinical development here at Alira Health, and I'll be the host of today's event. The focus of our conversation today will be how to benefit today and in the future from the Orphan Drug program, and how to build a regulatory strategy for successful rare disease product registration in the EU market. We'll also discuss the latest updates from UCO meeting that took place last week. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly go over a few items on how to participate in today's event. Please be advised that all participants are muted for the duration of this webinar. However, you are able to fully engage with the speakers by submitting your questions via the toolbar on your screen. You may send your questions at any time during the event. We'll collect them throughout the talk and address them through the Q&A session at the end of this call. Lastly, today's event is being recorded, and all registered participants will receive a follow-up email with a link to view the recording. Before we kick things off with our speakers, I'd like to briefly tell you about the organizer of today's event, Alira Health. We're an international, patient-centric, and technology-enabled advisory firm with a mission to humanize healthcare. We're doing this through a full spectrum of services we provide, including research and clinical development solutions, technology-powered consulting, and real-world evidence. If you'd like to learn more about us and how we're working with patients to make them an active participant in the clinical research process, I encourage you to look at the materials provided in the download section of your tool. Without further ado, let me introduce you to today's speakers, Damia Ben-Shaban and Erica Armenteros. Damia joined Alira Health as a pharmacist by training with 11 years of regulatory affairs experience in the pharmaceutical industry. She has worked in startups as well as mid to large pharmaceutical companies and has extensive experience in drug development, having led the registration and the life cycle strategy of different medicinal products across a number of therapeutic areas. Prior to joining Alira Health, Eric holds degrees in microbiology and a master's in pharmaceutical and biotechnological industry. He has worked previously in a regulatory consulting firm where he built his expertise on strategic regulatory roadmaps for global development. He's also got strong experience in orphan drug designations, expedited programs, scientific advice procedures, and marketing authorization preparedness and submission. With that, I was going to begin our presentation with a poll to get the conversation started about the regulatory challenges regarding rare disease products. You should now see it on your screen, and please feel free to cast your vote. Just wait a moment for everyone to get their vote in. Okay, it looks like lack of support or knowledge with applicable regulations is the highest area of concern in this area. With that, Damia, Eric, you have the floor. Provide any feedback on that and begin the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you, Brendan, for this introduction. So and I'm happy to hear that the attendees here, so the main challenge for the attendees here is the regulatory part, since our focus today is the regulatory part. I hope that this webinar will be helpful for you. And before to start this webinar, so I would like to get back to this survey in order to discuss a bit these challenges. And indeed, so all the responses, whatever the response you may give, in, I would say that you are right, because when we are developing a drug that is targeting a rare disease, it may be very challenging in terms of drug development. You may be, for example, facing a burden in terms of the understanding of your disease. Some rare diseases have not clear identification of the causes and the pathway, which makes it very difficult sometimes to have the model, even in vitro or in vivo, in order to have your proof of concept. When you go further into your development and you go at the clinical step, you may be also facing some difficulties in terms of the limited number of patients. You are in rare disease, you don't have that much patient to recruit, and many of them in rare diseases are children. In addition to that, sometimes you are obliged to recruit in a large geographical space, which may raise the fact that you will have ethnicity issues sometimes with subpopulations because of the ethnic differences between patients. And for these rare diseases where you have sometimes a poor understanding of the disease, it's sometimes even harder because you may not have a validated endpoint in order to reach your outcome. And in addition to that, specifically for more, I would say, for small companies, medium enterprise as well, you may have also be facing a financial challenge where you may have a funding which is limited, or even uncertainty in terms of return on investment. And in addition to that, we as regulatory people, regulatory board, we have regulatory bodies, they are here to make sure that even if you are facing all these challenges, you have a product that has good quality for the patients, and you are releasing data that are reliable. We need a product that is safe and that is efficacious for the patients. These are key elements. And as I said before, so next slide, Eric. So our webinar is going to focus on the regulatory part. We will start by giving you a bit about, just make sure it's only EU. We will focus mainly on EU. We will have sometimes US comparison, but we will give you the EU legal framework. And then we will go more in depth about what is a rare disease, what is an orphan drug. And then we have a look to the market, to the current situation of the market and the treatments. Where are we in Europe currently? And afterwards, we will move into more practical elements regarding the orphan designations. We will speak about the incentives. So what kind of incentives do you have if you are developing a drug in rare diseases, how you may be eligible to get these incentives, and then how to proceed, how to get your designation, what is the regulatory procedure, what are the prerequisites, and what are all the activities that you have to follow when you have been granted your orphan designation. And at the end of the webinar, we will go through quickly through the main challenge, which is coming in the upcoming years, which is the modification or the amendment, if I can say, of the EU Orphan Drug Regulation. And we will end up our webinar with a Q&A session. So let's start our webinar. So first of all, what is the EU legal framework when you are developing drugs for rare diseases? We have in Europe what we call the Orphan Regulation. It's number 141/2000. It has been set up in 1999 and put into force so in 2000. This regulation put a framework for drug developers regarding the development of drugs that are targeting rare diseases. This regulation outlines the EU procedure to get what we call this orphan designation, and also what are the criteria in order to reach this designation in the purpose to put into the market an orphan medicinal product. It defines as well the incentives for you during the development and at the step of commercialization of your orphan medicinal product, and it has established a committee at EU level, at the EMA, European Medicine Agency, which is called the COMP, the Committee for Orphan Medicinal Products, which is the main contact point for developers for drugs in rare diseases. And recently, in 2020, the European Commission published a performance evaluation of this Orphan Regulation that has been put in place, as I told you, in 2000. So the evaluation were from 2000 to 2017, and sometimes in some data until 2019. And we will discuss it later, but just to give you a flavor, this evaluation ended up with the fact that there is a need to amend it in a way that will in the purpose to foster the research and the development of orphan medicines in rare diseases, as well as to improve then the availability and the timely access for the patients. Next slide, Eric. So regarding the definitions, so now you will be hearing rare disease, you heard orphan drugs, you heard orphan medicinal product, orphan drug designation. Just like to put a context. What is a rare disease? A rare disease, it's a condition or a disease. In Europe, we consider it like rare if it's affecting less than 5 in 10,000 European citizens. And in the US side, we consider that we have a rare disease if it's affecting fewer than 200,000 people in the US. They are almost the same definition when you go to prevalence, real prevalence, even if they are presented in different ways between the two areas. And an orphan drug, by definition, it's a drug. It can be a biological or chemical drug that is used for the treatment, the diagnosis, or the prevention of a rare disease, but under the control of being eligible to some criteria. We have to be eligible to criteria, what we call the eligibility criteria, and Eric will tell you later on more about what are these criteria. And briefly, when you will be hearing an orphan drug, you will be hearing orphan medicinal product, is the same thing. So what is the current situation for rare diseases in Europe? So bear in mind that we have 30 million people in Europe that are bearing a rare disease. If we go worldwide, we have 300 million of people with a rare disease. Over 6,000 different rare diseases have been identified to date. And we have 5 new every week. And 70% of this rare disease exclusively occur in children. And 96% of this rare disease have a prevalence of less than 1 in 10,000 people. This is what we call ultra-rare diseases. And 95% of this rare disease, unfortunately, are remaining without an authorized treatment in Europe, which means for you as a drug developers, you have an avenue to go and to develop drugs for these rare diseases. And when we go to focus into the market, so for the EU orphan market, you can see that between 2006 and 2011, from table 1 here, we had an increase of over 100% of an average of the number of new marketing authorization in Europe, which means that the Orphan Regulation, when it came up into force in 2000, boosted quite heavily so the development of orphan medicinal products, which is very good. It means that it's a success. And then later on, if you go into between 2011 and 2017, it came to more stability, but it's still increasing because we have an increase of 12% of new marketing authorization in Europe. And if we go to the forecast, you can see that the size of the European orphan drug market is forecasted to worth more than $55 billion by 2027, compared to now, which is forecasted to $38 billion, which means that it's a positive growth. We have a growth average of 7% from 2022 to 2027. So here, here is the EU market, and when you generally, as a drug developer of orphan disease, as I said, you don't have a lot of patients. We have the number of patients are limited, so you do generally clinical trials all over the world, and the development is always should be even global. And this is why we should have a look to the global market and to see how is it doing. The global market, when you see it's doing, is also performing very good. The worldwide orphan drug sales annual forecast growth rate is over 11% from 2019 to 2024. And we consider that it's almost the double of the non-orphan drug market. So here, if we just step back and just recap, you can see that there is 95% of disease waiting for a drug, for a treatment to be approved, and the market is doing good. And these are mainly because of the incentives that we have in Europe. And here, we can just have a look to these incentives in order to give you an overview of what are the incentives. We have chosen to give you both Europe and US in order to have kind of comparisons, since they are the two main regions of development. In Europe, regarding the incentives, when you call the incentives, it's what you will have as well in terms of support or in terms of financial support as well when you are developing or putting a product that is targeting a rare disease into the market. For Europe, we have the main incentive is the market exclusivity. When you put a product, when you put an orphan drug into the market, you benefit from a 10 years market exclusivity. That can be extended up to 2 years when you are developing in children, the PIP, when you have this pediatric investigational plan agreed and you are developing the drug in children, comparing to US where you have 7 years. You are also having financial incentives. You have fees reductions and even waivers if you are a small or medium enterprise with this small and medium enterprise status. In Europe, unfortunately, there is no tax credit by itself, but at the member state level, you do have some tax credit. And at the European level, you also can benefit from programs, from fundings programs like Horizon Europe. When you go to the US, you have almost the same type of financial incentives. You have fee waivers, you have tax credit for clinical research and cost. You have also option to benefit also from programs like the FDA Orphan Program Grants Program or also the NIH grants. And at the time of advice, you have also different type of advices, and the main one at the European level when you have an orphan drug is what we call the protocol assistance. The protocol assistance, it's a kind of an advice. It's a scientific advice that is specific for drugs that are having this orphan drug designation. This advice is even more than giving you an advice. They are going to help you in order to respond to key questions when you are developing orphan drugs. Mainly, for example, they will support you in order to reach out the market in terms of defining the similarity, the clinical benefit. All these you will see them. So with Eric a little bit. So just after this slide with the eligibility criteria. And regarding the programs that may expedite your development or your approval, you also can benefit from different programs. The first thing is that you have access to the European what we call the centralized procedure. It means that you apply once and you have a license through all EU member states. You have also access to what we call a conditional approval. It means that you can get an access to your license with less comprehensive data than usually requested for normal drug development, but under the condition that you are going to fulfill to complete your development and provide comprehensive data. And you can have, depending on the disease, you can have access also to approval under exceptional circumstances. For this type of approval, it means that you are having an approval, but you are enabled to provide comprehensive data because of the disease or because of the fact that it's unethical to conduct clinical trials and to get your comprehensive data. You may be also having this accelerated assessment, which means that when you apply for a drug, usually you wait for 200, the procedures timelines is 210 days without clock stop. And when you are under accelerated assessments, this will foster your approval to 150 days. And you have, so I would like to finalize with the Prime, which is also an exciting program for the developers of orphan drugs. The Prime is targeting mainly disease where you don't have a drug available, or when there is a drug available, you have a major benefit, therapeutic advantage over the existing therapies. And here you can liaise very early with the FDA, and they will be it's a proactive support from the FDA in order to help you to generate robust data and to allow you access at the end to this accelerated approval, which is very nice. And comparing to US, I will go very quickly since it's not the topic, but bear in mind that you have also like in Europe, different programs that will help you to fasten your development or your approval, like the fast track approval the breakthrough designation, the accelerated approval pathway, and also the priority review designation. And now, so I give the floor to Eric, who will explain you more in details the eligibility criteria.
Thank you very much, Damia. Yeah, we will focus now more on the regulatory component of the orphan drug designation. As Damia was commenting, the EU Orphan Regulation was published and entered into force in 2000. However, the US Orphan Regulation was approved a long time ago before the European one. As a matter of fact, it was the US Orphan Regulation who paved the way internationally of all orphan regulations, meaning that the European Orphan Regulation is very much based and very similar to the US one. However, it has some additional elements due to the particularities of the EU regulatory system. No? And we will have a look now at this slide. No? So the first criterion is the prevalence. No? As Damia was commenting previously, the definition is different, but at the end of the day, the prevalence in both regions, the real prevalence is very similar. No? It is true that some conditions that are recognized as an orphan in the EU might not be recognized as an orphan in the US, but are just exceptions. Most of them are recognized as an orphan in both regions. Here, regarding the prevalence, sponsors should take into account that at the time of the application, sponsors should provide an estimation of the prevalence of the rare disease that they are targeting, and unless justified, they should provide this estimation based on European data and not mix between European, US, unless justified. No? So it should be focused on the data coming from that specific region. Apart from the prevalence, one of the most important criterion is the medical plausibility, and this criterion is equivalent in both regions. The medical plausibility criterion requires the sponsor to demonstrate that the product can treat the targeted disease, and this demonstration should be based on scientific data, and this scientific data can come from in vitro, in vivo, but preferably it should come from clinical data. We will comment later that the degree or let's say the level of evidence required to support the orphan criterion will depend very much on the stage of development. And this is something that we will come back later and we will further discuss later. Then the other key criterion that is only applicable in the EU is the significant benefit. The significant benefit basically requires that the sponsor demonstrate that their product is better than the existing treatments available in the market. And when we say better, it should demonstrate once again with scientific evidence that the drug is having a better efficacy or a better safety. And this, as I said, this significant benefit is only applicable to the EU and not to the US. Okay, But however, there is one additional criterion, that is the clinical superiority, that only applies at the end of the license application, at the time of the marketing application, the license application, that is very similar to the significant benefit, but it's not the same, and we will explain why. No, the clinical superiority only applies at the marketing application, and once again, it requires that the sponsor demonstrate that the product is better than the existing therapies. That it's better to a similar drug, meaning that the sponsor should perform a previous similarity assessment, and if they conclude that the drug is similar to a drug that is currently available in the market, then the clinical superiority criterion will apply. If not, this will not apply. And that's the big difference between the clinical superiority and the significant benefit, and also the difference between EU and US. Because in EU, if there is a product approved, it doesn't matter that it's similar or not. You will always be required to demonstrate that your product is superior, no, in terms of efficacy, safety, whatever, but you will always be required to do so. However, in the US, this superiority only applies if your product is similar to an already approved orphan drug. Okay, so this is the criteria. Then let's move on to the regulatory procedure. This is just a simplified scheme of the orphan procedure. Before the official orphan procedure, sponsors can perform what is called the pre-submission meeting. Now, this is an optional meeting with the EMA, and this meeting allows you to the sponsor to have an informal discussion with the EMA, where you will obtain feedback from the EMA. The EMA will not assess the content of your application, but they will review and they will provide recommendations whether you should provide additional information. You should also include on your application an additional point or reinforce another point. So at the end of the day, this EMA pre-submission meeting will help you as a sponsor to prepare a robust orphan drug application. So that's why here at Alira, we usually recommend to perform this kind of interaction before the official procedure. No, we should take into account, no, that this pre-submission meeting take at least 2 months, 1 month of validation and one month until the meeting is granted. No, so if there is no rush, we usually recommend this kind of pre-submission meeting. No? Then once we have our application prepared, we need to initiate the official procedure. No, once again, there is 1 month of validation, and after the validation, it starts the official procedure. That is the day 1. So then, during the next month, from day 1 to day 60, the EMA will evaluate your application, and at day 60, the EMA will issue an opinion. If this opinion is positive, then in 30 days, the European Commission will make public a decision informing about that your product has been specifically granted with an ODD. On the other hand, if you do not receive a positive opinion, the EMA will share with you a list of questions, and the sponsor is required to provide an answer to this list of questions. The EMA will review the list of questions, and if they are not fully convinced or some doubts still remain, the EMA will invite you to come to the EMA or to have a teleconference, basically to have a discussion, what is called the oral explanation. And in this oral explanation, the sponsor should justify, provide arguments to support the questions, and at the end of the day, to support the orphan criteria in front of the EMA. Whatever the final opinion of the EMA will be, meaning it can be positive or negative, whatever, this opinion will be publicly made available. we will make publicly available. So therefore, here there is a point, no, that if you receive the list of questions, then the sponsor should decide whether or not to continue with the procedure, because if they take the risk, perhaps they obtain a negative opinion, and then this will be made publicly available. But on the other hand, if they withdraw, that there is no problem, you can start again the procedure. But if you start again the procedure, you have to bear in mind that the procedure in the best case scenario is having a duration of 1 month of validation plus 2 months, so minimum 3 months. And additionally, if we are again under the oral explanation, we are having a procedure of 4 months. So this is something that should be taken into account. No? Then moving to the next slide. Before submitting an orphan drug application, we should take into account what are the prerequisites. No? One of the prerequisites is the fact that the sponsor should be established in the European Economic Area. Sponsors from outside the EU can also apply for an orphan drugs, of course, but they need what is called the the EMA representative. That is basically a company that is located in Europe and just acts on behalf of this sponsor in front of the EMA. No? And then the other second prerequisite is the IRIS platform. Initially, the orphan drug application and also other kind of procedures such as scientific advice, everything was requested via email. No? But now the EMA is moving to this platform that is called the IRIS platform, and the orphan drug request must be done via this IRIS platform. And to say truth, this platform is very easy to navigate, but the problem here is that it's difficult to get all the permissions to be able to use this platform. No? So that's why it's also recommendable to have someone to help you to make all the, let's say, paperwork, so that you make sure that your application is submitted in time, no? Right on time. Okay, and then let's move to the next slide. So, okay, so in the situation that we have been granted with an ODD, the sponsor has several responsibilities. During the development, the sponsor should submit to the EMA what is called the annual report. This annual report is just a report where the sponsor summarizes the status of development of the medicine. So at the end of the day, this is a bureaucratic process, let's say, and it has no impact on the status of your orphan drug designation. But still, it should be done, and the sponsor should be aware of it and should plan in advance, no, to compile all the information needed to be included, no, in this annual report. And on the other hand, and more importantly, we have a couple of reports that should be submitted to the EMA at the time of the marketing authorization. On the one hand, we have the similarity report, and the similarity report is just an assessment that is performed by the sponsor, and that report is based on the products that are currently on the market and that are targeting an orphan disease, and based on a specific criteria that is established in the regulation, and basically the sponsor should, based on the molecular structural features of the drug, the mechanism of action, and the indication, they should conclude whether their product is similar to any approved product in the market that is targeting an orphan disease. Therefore, here we have two scenarios. Scenario one, there is no similarity, therefore there is no problem. But if there is a similarity, then the clinical superiority criterion that we were mentioning earlier will apply, and therefore you will be required to demonstrate that your product is better than the similar product that is currently approved. And then on the other hand, and even more importantly, is the orphan maintenance report. This report is basically, it's a report that is submitted by the sponsor. And once again, the sponsor is required to justify and to demonstrate that they meet the orphan criteria again. And when we say the orphan criteria, we are talking about the prevalence, the medical plausibility, and more importantly, at this stage, the significant benefit. And at this stage, at the time of the marketing authorization, the level of evidence, the stringency is higher. The level of evidence is higher, meaning that you cannot support the significant benefit based on preclinical evidence from animal models. No, you need here clinical data. And that's key because you need to have a very good clinical plan so that once you complete that plan and you are under the marketing authorization, you have all the evidence needed to support the orphan criteria and specifically the significant benefit. You need to discuss with the EMA as soon as possible the endpoints, what are the relevant endpoints, what is the relevant comparator, etc. So the soon you apply for an orphan drug, the better, because you will be able to benefit from advice from regulatory authorities and to elaborate, build up a robust clinical development plan. So that you will be more certain at the time of the marketing authorization. And once the EMA will review this orphan maintenance report, they will decide to grant you the marketing exclusivity. That's the purpose, to obtain the marketing exclusivity at the time of the EMA marketing authorization application. So I will leave the floor back again to Damia to follow on with the presentation.
Thank you, Eric. So if just to summarize, we have seen during this webinar how to apply for an orphan drug. So what are the activities you do? So what are the incentives? And at the beginning, we saw that the Orphan Medicinal Regulation that came into force in 2000 speed up the development of orphan drugs, so drugs that are targeting rare disease in Europe. But now just let's have a look to the limitation of the current Orphan Regulation. So first, so we will see just main limitations. So we will stick on 4 limitations, but they are more than 4, just to make sure that. And you have full reports, the full European Commission report, if you would like to read more. Or otherwise, we will be happy to discuss this point during the Q&A or offline. So just let's start with these limitations. The first one. When you go to the authorized medicinal products, the orphan drugs products into the market between 2000 and 2017, you can see that 72% of them are targeting a disease where we have already an available treatment, which is good, which means that the patients that is bearing a patient that is bearing a disease, a rare disease, can have different alternatives, which is good. But however, we are in a situation where we have 95% of rare disease that remain without an authorized treatments, which means that most ONP or orphan medicinal products we have on the market, the development is focusing mainly on disease area where we have already alternative treatment. The second point is we have already discussed this point, and regarding the fact that 70% of rare disease are exclusively pediatric onset. And we consider that there is around 90% of all rare diseases, they are manifesting during the childhood. While we have only 12% of orphan drug designations that are related to a condition affecting only children, which means that here we are in a situation where the orphan drug development is not equally focused between children and adults. The third limitation is that between 2000 and 2019, you can see here from this from the slides that 67% of the ODD of the orphan drug designations are targeting 3 disease areas, which are blood-forming organs, dermatology, and antineoplastic and immunomodulating agents. This means that we have development of orphan diseases. The benefit is going mainly to limited number of diseases. And the last but not least is that between 2000 and 2019, 60% of the designation of the orphan drug designation, and almost the same, 56% of the authorized orphan drugs on the market were targeting rare diseases with a prevalence which is higher over than 1 in 10,000 EU citizens. And we discussed early during this webinar that 96% of these rare diseases are having a prevalence which is less than 1 in 10,000 EU citizens, which means that orphan drug development or developers are mainly focusing or concentrating in what we call least rare diseases. Here, these are some points that we have taken from the European Commission report and showing the limitation of this orphan regulation. It was nice. The regulation was very helpful and speed up the process, and it's given a lot of incentives allowing drug developers to put product into the market, but there is an avenue to improve it and to make also the drugs available for the patients that are waiting now for a treatment. And when you go to what was the proposal? So next slide, so please, Eric. Yeah, here, so European Commissions end up with the fact that there is a need to revise this OMP in order to foster the development, to give the chance for the patients that are waiting for treatment to benefit from a therapy. And for that, they made a proposal. We are not going to go into details into the proposal. The reason why we are not going to go into details is the fact that the European Commission issued a proposal that has been refused, that has been rejected this summer by the European Commission Regulatory Scrutiny Board, on the fact that this proposal is targeting mainly the marketing exclusivity and the orphan designation. On the marketing exclusivity, the proposal was to reduce the duration of this marketing authorization, of this marketing exclusivity, and also to add a conditionality if you would like to extend it. On the side of the orphan drug designation, the proposal ended up with the fact that they would like to put a limited validity, which we do not have up to date. We don't have a limitation in terms of validity of your orphan designations, and also to reduce the disease prevalence in order to target the ones that are more rare diseases, and also to put a threshold a prevalence threshold for the drugs that are developed in more than one orphan disease. And as I said, the European Commission Regulatory Scrutiny Board rejected this proposal on the fact that they consider that this proposal is not helping the orphan drug developers to continue and to raise funds and to continue development in these ultra-rare diseases. But what is sure is that the regulation is changing. In the few years we will be issued, you will have a new regulation, amended regulation that will maybe change the market exclusivity and also may have an impact on your designation. This revision may have a direct impact on your development, on your drug development in rare diseases. And even though you may have to revisit, perhaps, we don't know, but you may have to revisit the development strategy. Aleha Health is following very carefully this new regulation, as the impact may be big regarding the current proposals. And so, as I said, so we are not going to discuss in details the numbers, the duration, etc. And we will be happy to liaise offline with you if you would like to discuss further these points. And here, just to summarize, I would say that it's not a summary, but it's mainly key points for you as a drug developer for orphan drug designate, for orphan drugs. Well, you need first to understand the disease. It's sometimes very hard to understand the disease, and sometimes even the agency is not able to understand the disease when you are working in some rare disease, very complex diseases, etc. This is why it's very important that you, as drug developers, you need to engage with patient associations very early. They are key patients. They are the ones suffering from the disease. They are the one understanding more of the disease. And you need as well to liaise with CAWEL. They are key for you. You need as well to consider the regulators as your partner. You need to engage with the regulators early, but at the right moment, not too early and not too late. It's important. This will allow you to take advantage of your orphan status if you do have one, and also from your SME status if you are a small or medium enterprise. And as a key fact, which is important to summarize, you need to you have an ongoing discussion, conversation with your regulators, the patients association, the patients themselves, and the key opinion leaders. If you have these three on board with you during your development, this will help you to get a successful journey. So thank you for being with us. So we are arrived at the end of the webinar, and I hand it over to Brendan.
Thank you, Damia. Thank you, Eric. We're now going to begin answering the questions that arrived during the webinar. So as a reminder, you can submit your questions through the question panel if you haven't done so already. With that, I'll address the first question that came in to Damia and to Eric. What happens if I have an ODD and a similar product arrives earlier to the market?
Yeah, this is, thank you. So thank you, Brendan. So I will take this question. I think this is the fear of all drug developers, and it's a very good question. And when you have an ODD, so Eric has been spoken about this similarity and the fact that you need to be very careful about the products that are around you and may arrive into the market before you. And if you have a product that arrives into the market before you, so as before, so it was discussed by Eric, you need to go through the similarity process. And the similarity, you need to analyze your product comparing to this product that may be similar to you, to your product regarding based on three facts. You have to see the molecular structure, the mechanism of action, and the indication. And then, based on these 3 points, if you have one of them that shows a significant difference, you are not considered as similar. So there is two options. You are not similar, then you have derogation. You can apply for your marketing authorization with no issue, under the fact that you demonstrate the quality, the efficacy, and the safety, etc. of your product. So normal process. But if you are similar, then you may arrive to the market and you may reach your marketing authorization, and there are three conditions, potential conditions. The first one is perhaps if you may reach an agreement with the product, with the company that put the product one, if we say the product that arrived before you, and you have a consent to put your product into the market. So an agreement between you and the company that arrived before you. And the second point is if the company that arrived before you is enabled to supply sufficiently the markets. It means that we still have an unmet need, and patients are not benefiting from the treatments because of the supply. And the third point, if you have what Eric discussed, this clinically superiority, it means that you demonstrate that your product is safer or more effective than the similar product. In these three cases, if you have one of them, you may reach the market even if a product arrived before you.
Great, thank you, Damia. Next question. It was mentioned in Europe, if there is a therapy already approved for the target rare disease, superiority demonstration is key. However, rare diseases in particular can be very challenging to run direct comparison clinical trials, and many products are approved based on single-arm trials. How can superiority be demonstrated in these cases?
So here, we the fact that we are not discussing this point. So this is a very complex question, and this is a very, very good question. I think we should take it offline because it's a long question. It's more drug development and how to show up clinical superiority. I would say that to demonstrate the clinical superiority is if a product arrived before you into the market, that you have to demonstrate this. And generally, if you are doing a single arm against placebo or single arm, depending on the situation, it means that you are in a situation where it's an ultra-rare disease, or where you have it's not ethical to put, for example, a patient into placebo if you don't have a comparison, etc. And these are very specific. I would say that we need to tell them one by one. So it's every drug development is different, and we cannot give just a direct response, if I may say. But we will be happy to respond offline if you would like to. We can liaise with you. You can have your case. And yeah, Eric, you have something to say? Maybe you would like to add something?
Yeah, just to complement your response. No, just to say that sometimes there are no straightforward response. No, what is the best comparator? What is the best design, clinical design, no, to demonstrate significant benefit. So that's why we should always take into account that we should resort to health authority support, no, that are always there, and we should bring the situation. What is the situation, the clinical situation, to the agency, and make the right questions to obtain the feedback that we are willing, no, to obtain. And in that regard, sometimes there are no straightforward questions, and the best thing is to deal with health authorities and to clarify with them to reach an agreement on how to best develop your drug. No? So.
Great, thank you both. Next question, can ODD accelerate the development or approval of my drug?
I can take this one. So regarding the ODD, if it's an accelerate, yes, we discussed regarding the incentives, so how the ODD can accelerate or speed up your development or approval. So, but typically, so being an orphan, having this ODD by that itself, so it does not allow you automatically to this to an accelerated approval or accelerated development, but it opens you the door to have this protocol assistance, as we discussed, which is very helpful and very supportive when you have an ODD. If you are eligible to prime, if you because of you are bringing new therapy for an available, there is no option for the patients, or there is a real benefit for the patient over the existing therapies, you may be eligible as well to prime, where you have proactive discussion with the EMA. And when the EMA, so they are very supportive here, so in order to build up clinical trials that would allow you to have robust data and open you the door to accelerated assessment. And what I can say as well, is regarding the approval, when you are dealing with these rare diseases as well, you may have access to approvals that are, I would say, that can happen quicker than normal drugs, non-orphan drugs, in terms of conditional approval. You can be granted this one. You can be granted as well the under exceptional circumstance approval, and also an accelerated assessments. I would say mainly the incentives will help you to speed up your development or your approval, but you don't have a straightforward, so just like it's not so, for example, fast track and you go, and yeah, it's a case by case, and the orphan drugs allow you, for example, protocol assistance, but the others you may fill in the gaps, to fit into the box in order to be allowed to go through them.
Great, thank you. Next question. When demonstrating that a disease is rare, are there any criteria for how the prevalence should be measured? For example, study methods, countries in scope, things of that nature.
Eric?
Yeah, I can take this question. No, that's a really good question, no? Because sometimes it's when we deal with a rare disease, depending on the rare disease that we are targeting, we think that everyone knows, no, that this is a rare disease, and we do not need to justify the prevalence, no? But the EMA and the US, both regions, requires to provide an estimation, and this estimation should be based on a method. So asking the question, there is no established method, because because of the nature of the condition can be very different between the conditions. So then the way that you yield and compile all the prevalence evidence might be different between the region, no? Depending on the registers, national registers that are following or tracking the cases related to this specific disease. So you need to build up an ad hoc method to justify the prevalence. No, so there is no specific method. And additionally, as I commented during the presentation, we should focus. We should define very well the region that we are targeting. No, so if we are targeting the EU, we are targeting the 27 member states. So we are not adding prevalence from Turkey, I don't know, or from other regions or other countries that are close to Europe. So we should only focus on data coming from EU member states, and unless that if it is justified, because we have had cases where there is only global prevalence data, and you can also based on the population try to justify what would be the real prevalence in Europe based on the global prevalence. No, this kind of thing. There is no established method. You need to justify always. You can use whatever the method you would like, but you always should to justify from a scientific point of view, and always take into account that you should focus on the region that you are targeting.
And if I may add, so you need also to be very careful with what we call the salami slicing, which means that when you have a condition which is a sub-condition of a global condition, and where you will be so defending a case where it's not a real rare disease, but it's a sub-disease or sub-condition, and this here you need to be very strong in your argumentation in order to avoid the refusal, because of if the agency will consider it more like salami slicing and not a real orphan disease or orphan condition.
Thank you both. Next question. Is it possible to ask for an ODD for a product already approved?
Eric?
Yeah, I can take this question also. This is also an interesting question, and the answer is yes. You can obtain an ODD for a product that is already approved, but we need to clarify that okay, you have the point is that the European Orphan Regulation does not allow for a product to mix between orphan indication together with non-orphan indications in the same application. Therefore, if a medicinal product is approved and then you realize that this product can also potentially treat to a rare disease, then you need to submit a separate marketing authorization, and afterwards then you will have your medicine, your new medicinal product, and then you have your own trade name, for your product, your own commercial name, different from the other one. So yes, it is possible. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it means that you end up with 2 marketing authorizations with 2 different life cycles, which is something important to consider. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to complement that, the reason for that is because marketing exclusivity is linked between a product and a disease. So therefore, you cannot have an orphan indication in a product that has not a non-orphan indication, because the marketing exclusivity will not be able to be applicable. That's the reason why. It is also always worth to know why regulation is in the way it is.
Great, thank you. Next question is, this participant understood that there are some eligibility criteria to be granted as ODD in addition to prevalence. So what is happening if my condition is orphan in term of prevalence, but not granted with the ODD? Where would I be classified as an orphan medicinal product?
Eric, go ahead.
No, okay, yeah. No, unfortunately, no, not. You will not be considered as an orphan drug because this is let's say, a regulatory concept, and you need to be granted with an orphan designation to be considered an orphan drug for regulatory purposes. Of course, we are talking here for regulatory purposes. So even you are targeting a condition that is having a prevalence lower than the orphan threshold, if you are not having this orphan drug, then you will not benefit from all related incentive around orphan drugs. No, that's a pity, no, because we know that some products are targeting specific products, specific specific diseases that are having a very low prevalence, and the development of such drugs are facing very similar challenges as orphan drug, no? But from a regulatory point of view, if you do not have, or you are not granted with an orphan drug, then you will not benefit from the incentives.
So I would say the main question for you, so for one who raised the question, is why you have not been granted this orphan designation. If you do have the prevalence, which is the key point, it means that you are targeting a rare disease, but you are not fitting the box of the others' eligibility criteria. And the main question is why you are not eligible. So what is missing and how you can do in order to benefit of this program. So what are the, you have to do this gap analysis to say why we have received this refusal. Was it too early? We don't have the medical plausibility. Shall we do more in vitro data, more convincing non-clinical data in order to reach out this designation? I would say that just, yeah, perhaps yes, today you are not eligible for that, but you need to define why you are not eligible and how to reach out, how you will be eligible, what is missing for your development, during your development, what should you do in order to get it. If you can get it, it will be very worth it, especially if you are small enterprise. It's very important because it will open you the door for different incentives and also discussion with agency in order to reach successful development and also an approval. So yeah, we can discuss if you would like offline, so we can liaise with you so we can understand much more better your case, and in order to see so how we can support you, how we can help you, and in order just to perhaps give you some key elements that we don't have because of the confidentiality here. We cannot disclose them, we cannot discuss, but yeah, we will be very happy to liaise with you and pursue and continue the discussion.
Great. And the last question we have here is it possible for the sponsor of an ODD application to be a person rather than a company or institution?
Yes, yeah, you are totally right. Yes, you can be a person when you apply to an orphan designation. The only prerequisite is that you have to live in the European Economic Area. If you are living in the European Economic Area, then you can apply by your own. But the only point here is that you don't have a proof of establishment because you are a person. So when you apply, you don't need to have this proof of establishment. Don't be worried if they are requesting you. And so just apply, and then the EMA will liaise with you after all, and afterwards during the validation, and they will request you a proof of I would say, so proof that you are citizenship or you are at least living in Europe, in the European Economic Area, and then they will have this proof. But regarding the GRPDs, they will also delete all your own personal information. They will not keep it in the system. And yeah, you may apply, so it's not an issue, and you can even later on transfer it to an institution, to a pharmaceutical group, to whatever. So yeah, it's possible.
Fantastic. And then there was one final question that came in about sharing the presentation, and we will be sharing the recording of today's event following the meeting. So with that, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, Regulatory Strategy for Registering Rare Disease Products in the EU. Thank you, Damia. Thank you, Eric, for your time and for sharing your insights. We hope everyone enjoyed the presentation and learned something new. Should anybody have any lingering questions that weren't addressed today, you can connect with us on LinkedIn or via email at the address you see here on the screen. Again, everyone will receive a follow-up email with a link to view the recording of today's event. We kindly appreciate any feedback that you may have on today's webinar as well. So please feel free to share your opinion in the survey that'll appear right at the end of this webinar. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.